I was sitting at my kitchen table in our little townhouse in Mississauga, going over the monthly budget spreadsheet on my laptop, when my phone buzzed with a text message. I almost didn't look at it. I was deep in numbers, trying to figure out how we were going to cover the property tax payment coming up in 2 weeks, and my concentration was fully locked in. But the buzz came again. Then, a third time, I picked up my phone. It was from my husband, Marcus. "I've been meaning to say this for a while. I'm not happy. I'm leaving. Don't call me. I need space. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the house." I read the message 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the table, very carefully, as if it might shatter. I stared at my budget spreadsheet. The numbers blurred. I picked the phone back up and read the message again, thinking maybe I had misunderstood something. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe autocorrect had done something bizarre, and what he actually meant to say was something completely different. It was not a joke. It was not autocorrect. My name is Claire Beaumont Walsh. I was 32 years old when this happened, working as a dental hygienist at a clinic in Port Credit, doing a job I genuinely loved even though it never made us rich. Marcus and I had been together for 6 years, married for 3. We had a daughter named Zoe, who was 9 years old and, I say this with complete honesty, the most observant and quietly determined child I have ever encountered in my entire life. She got that from neither of us, frankly. She just came out of the womb, watching everything with those serious brown eyes, cataloging the world with a precision that made adults uncomfortable. Marcus had always been charming. That was the problem. Or maybe that was the gift, depending on which part of our story you're reading. He was an account manager at a mid-sized logistics firm downtown, good at schmoozing clients, good at making people feel special and seen. He'd done that to me when we first met at a mutual friend's cottage weekend near Collingwood. He'd handed me a glass of wine, asked me what I thought about the stars over Georgian Bay, and I was done. 6 months later, we were living together. 2 years after that, married. The house was the thing that concerned me most when I read that text message. We had bought it together 18 months ago, a 3-bedroom townhouse that we'd stretched ourselves to afford, both of our names on the mortgage. But the down payment had come almost entirely from money I had saved over 5 years of working, while Marcus had gone through a period of changing jobs repeatedly and burning through his own savings. I had put in $80,000 of my own money. Marcus had contributed $12,000. We didn't talk about that disparity, because Marcus didn't like talking about money, which I had always found slightly odd for someone who worked in business. I tried calling him that evening. Voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. I sent a text asking him to at least come home so we could talk about Zoe, if nothing else, because she deserved better than to have her father vanish with a text message. No response. Zoe noticed at dinner that I wasn't eating. She was doing her homework at the kitchen table while I heated up soup I didn't want, and she looked up at me with those careful eyes and said, "Mom, you've been stirring that for like 10 minutes and it's going to burn." I looked down. She was right. "Is Dad coming home tonight?" she asked. I put the spoon down. I turned off the burner. I sat across from her at the table, and I told her, as simply and calmly as I could, that Dad and I were having some problems, and that Dad was staying somewhere else for a little while. I told her it had nothing to do with her. I told her that both of us loved her more than anything. Zoe looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "He's been acting weird since February." She said it the way you'd note that it was raining outside. Informational. Calm. It was currently late April. "Weird how?" I asked. "His phone is always face down," she said, "and he started going to the gym a lot, but he comes home smelling like coffee, not sweat." I had noticed neither of these things. I felt briefly humiliated by this, and then I felt something that was harder to name, a kind of cold, focused alertness. Like when you're doing a cleaning and suddenly spot a cavity you weren't expecting and your whole attention narrows to that one point. "Okay," I said. "Thanks for telling me, Bug." She nodded and went back to her homework. I sat there and thought about February. In February, Marcus had suggested we refinance the mortgage. He said interest rates were shifting and we could get a better deal, lower our monthly payments, free up some cash. He'd brought home a stack of papers, walked me through them quickly over dinner. said it was time sensitive and the broker needed them back within 2 days. I had signed where he pointed. I trusted him. He worked in business, he understood these things better than I did, and I was tired after a long week of back-to-back patient appointments. I went to my filing cabinet that night after Zoe was in bed. I pulled out every piece of paper related to our house. I spread them on the kitchen table, under the overhead light, and I started reading, slowly and carefully, the way I had not done in February. It took me an hour and a half to understand what I was looking at. Marcus had refinanced the mortgage, yes, but the new mortgage was for $40,000 more than the remaining balance on the original one. That extra $40,000 had been released as a lump sum, a cash-out refinance. It had been deposited into our joint account in early March. Our joint account currently held $217. I checked our savings account next. Empty. I checked the TFSA we'd set up together. Empty. I sat very still at the kitchen table for a very long time. Then I got up, went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, looked at myself in the mirror, and said out loud, "Okay, Claire. Think." The next morning I called in sick to the clinic for the first time in 2 years, dropped Zoe at school, and went to our bank in person. I sat across from a very kind advisor named Priya, who pulled up our accounts and confirmed, gently, what I had already pieced together. In March, $41,000 had been transferred out of our joint account in 4 separate transactions over the course of 2 weeks. The transfers had gone to an account I didn't recognize. "Can you tell me whose account that is?" I asked. "I'm not able to share that information," Priya said, "but I can tell you that the transfers were authorized using credentials associated with your account. Marcus's login, not mine." I asked Priya to help me understand my options. She was incredibly patient. She explained that because my name was on the mortgage, I was equally liable for the increased debt. She explained that because the account was joint, the withdrawals were technically legal, even though they were obviously not made with my consent. She told me I should speak with a family lawyer as soon as possible, and that she could put a flag on the account to require dual authorization for any future large transactions. I thanked her. I left the bank. I sat in my car in the parking lot on Lakeshore Road and watched a streetcar go by and thought about the fact that I was 32 years old, the sole caregiver for a 9-year-old, holding a mortgage that was now $40,000 deeper than it should have been, with $217 in my account, and a husband who had turned off his phone. I called my sister that evening. She drove over from Oakville and sat with me at the kitchen table while Zoe slept, and we went through everything together. My sister is a practical person, which is what I needed. She told me to document everything, call a lawyer in the morning, and not to make any sudden moves with the house or accounts until I had legal advice. She also quietly slid $300 cash across the table to me and told me it was for groceries, and I was not to argue about it. I did not argue about it. I spent the next 2 weeks moving through my days like I was walking through fog. I went to work. I smiled at patients. I made Zoe's lunches and helped her with her reading assignments, and went to her soccer practice on Saturday mornings, and sat on the cold metal bleachers, pretending to be a normal person. At night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and tried to do math in my head about how long I could sustain the mortgage payments on my salary alone, and whether I would need to sell the house and what that would do to Zoe's school, her friends, the only home she had ever known. At some point in the second week, I got sick. Not emotionally sick, actually physically sick. My body, apparently, had decided this was a reasonable time to catch a respiratory infection that turned into a bronchial thing, that turned into a week of me barely able to get off the couch. My sister came and stayed with us, taking Zoe to school and handling the logistics of the house, while I alternated between sleeping and staring at the ceiling and coughing in a way that alarmed everyone, including me. On the 4th day of this, Zoe came and sat on the edge of my bed. She was still in her school uniform, which meant my sister had just picked her up. She looked at me with that precise, evaluating gaze she had, the one that always made me feel like she was reading a document. "Mom," she said, "are we going to lose the house?" "No," I said. which was the most honest answer I could give, because I genuinely did not know, and no was what I was working toward. Is it because of the money Dad took? I looked at her. What do you know about that? I heard you and Aunt Renee talking, she said. Not apologetic about it, just factual. You said he took $40,000 from the refinance. I closed my eyes for a second. Then I said, Zoe, I'm going to figure this out, I promise you. But it's going to take a little time. She nodded slowly. She sat there for another moment, and then she said, I have an idea. Bug, you're 9. I know, she said. Do you want to hear it or not? I looked at her. I said, tell me. She told me. I lay there in my bed, wrapped in blankets, running a slight fever, and I listened to my 9-year-old daughter lay out a plan that was, I have to say, significantly more coherent than anything I had managed to produce in 2 weeks of sleepless catastrophizing. When she was done, I asked her 3 questions to make sure I understood it correctly. She answered all 3 without hesitation. Zoe, I said, when did you think of this? The day after Dad left, she said. I've been waiting for you to feel better enough to hear it. What Zoe had done, in the 10 days I had been sick and barely functional, was this. She had gotten into my email on the family iPad. She knew my password because she'd watched me type it in approximately 800 times, and she had found and read every single email thread between me and the mortgage broker from February. She had then, with patience that I still find astonishing, searched the broker's name online, found the brokerage's business registration, found that the broker was licensed through FSRA, and written down the license number. She had also found, in a thread I had not read carefully, an email that mentioned a second contact copied on the refinancing paperwork, a name I didn't recognize, with an email address from a company called Meridian Advisory Group. She had searched that company. It did not appear to have a website. It had a business registration in Ontario that was only 8 months old. She had written all of this down in a notes app on the iPad and organized it into a timeline. I think that's where Dad sent the money, she said. Meridian Advisory. I think it might be a fake company. I sat up in bed. My head swam a little. I said, Zoe, how do you know what a shell company is? She shrugged. YouTube. Also, we did a unit on financial literacy in school last year, and my teacher talked about fraud. I want to say that I immediately leapt into action. I didn't. I was sick, and the information was a lot to absorb, and I spent another 2 days in bed just letting it settle. But on the 3rd day, I got up, showered, ate actual food, and called the family lawyer I'd consulted 2 weeks earlier. I told her what Zoe had found. There was a pause on the line, and then my lawyer said, Your 9-year-old found this? Yes, I said. Another pause. Then, send me everything she documented. All of it. Over the following week, things moved quickly. My lawyer contacted the FSRA about the broker. She also involved a forensic accountant she worked with regularly, who looked at the transfer records and confirmed that Meridian Advisory Group appeared to have no legitimate business activity. It was registered to an address that turned out to be a UPS store mailbox in Brampton, and its only apparent function had been to receive and then redistribute funds. The accountant believed the money had been funneled through Meridian into a personal account, possibly Marcus's, possibly someone else's, possibly both. My lawyer applied for a court order to freeze any joint assets while the investigation was underway. This is the part where I have to tell you what happened with Marcus, because up until this point, I had still not spoken to him. He had maintained complete silence for nearly a month. No calls, no texts, nothing about Zoe, nothing about the house. My sister called him furious one Sunday, and he actually picked up, which shocked all of us, and told her it was between me and him and to stay out of it, and then hung up. But then Zoe sent him a text. She did this without telling me, which I discovered afterward. She texted him from my phone while I was in the shower, a single message that said, Dad, it's Zoe. I need to talk to you. It's important. Please call me tonight. He called within 20 minutes. She didn't tell me any of this until after. She took my phone into her room, closed the door, and had a conversation with her father that lasted 47 minutes. I found out about it when I came downstairs and saw my phone sitting on the kitchen counter and Zoe sitting at the table, doing what appeared to be a very calm drawing of a horse. "Did someone call?" I asked, because I'd heard murmuring from upstairs. "Dad called," she said. I stared at her. "Zoe, I texted him first," she said. "I thought he should know some things before you contacted him through the lawyers. I thought it would be better if he heard it from me." She looked up from her drawing. "I hope that's okay." I sat down. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I knew about the money," she said. "I told him I knew about Meridian Advisory and the mailbox in Brampton. I told him that Mom's lawyer had already filed the court documents to freeze the joint assets and that the FSRA was investigating the mortgage broker." She paused. "I also told him that I had screenshotted every email in Mom's account related to the refinancing, including the ones where the broker confirmed his instructions, and that I'd saved them to 3 different places." I said, very quietly, "Zoe." "He was quiet for a really long time," she said. "Then he asked me how I knew all this." I said I read the emails. "He asked me if I'd told Mom." I said yes. "He asked how Mom was doing." She went back to her drawing. "I told him Mom was doing fine, and that if he wanted to do right by us, he should call the lawyer and not make this harder than it needed to be." I don't fully know how to describe what I felt sitting there in my kitchen, listening to my 9-year-old tell me this. It was not a simple feeling. There was something that clenched in my chest that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite pride, but was somewhere between the two. This overwhelming, disorienting awareness that my daughter had, in a very quiet and very deliberate way, handled something that I had been too sick and too overwhelmed to handle myself. She had done it carefully. She had done it without drama. She had done it the way she did everything, which was with a thoroughness that made the adults around her look scattered. I also felt, I'll be honest, a complicated wave of guilt. My 9-year-old should have been thinking about her soccer team and her horse drawings and whether she could get a hamster, not documenting financial fraud and negotiating with her father on her mother's behalf. "You shouldn't have had to do any of that," I told her. She looked up at me and said, with the directness she had always possessed, "I know, but someone had to." Marcus called my lawyer's office 2 days later. He didn't admit to everything people in his position rarely do immediately, but he agreed to enter mediation, and he agreed to the asset freeze, which my lawyer said was significant. It meant he was aware that fighting it would be worse for him. The forensic accountant continued working. Over the following weeks, a clearer picture emerged. Marcus had met a woman at an industry conference in Calgary the previous autumn. Her name is not important to this story. What is important is that they had made plans together, and those plans involved money specifically, money that Marcus apparently believed he was entitled to extract from our shared life before he exited it. Meridian Advisory had been set up, with the help of the mortgage broker, as a mechanism to move funds. The broker's license was suspended during the FSRA investigation, and a separate referral was made to the relevant regulatory body for potential fraud charges. Marcus's position, when he eventually had to articulate it through his own lawyer, was that he believed the refinanced amount constituted his share of the home's equity. This position did not hold up to scrutiny, not least because $80,000 of the original down payment had been mine, which my lawyer documented thoroughly, and not least because I thought it was mine, is not generally accepted as a legal justification for moving money through a shell company without your spouse's knowledge or consent. Mediation was not pleasant. I am not going to pretend it was. There were sessions where I sat across a table from Marcus and had to look at him and remember who I had thought he was and reconcile that with who he actually turned out to be, and that process was painful in a way that I don't have precise words for. He did not look the same to me. He looked smaller, somehow, like something that had been revealed as less than it appeared. But mediation moved toward a resolution, because the alternative litigation, with the documentation Zoe had assembled, was not good for Marcus. The settlement required him to repay the $41,000 drawn from our joint account, structured through a payment plan. He agreed to a formal custody arrangement, giving me primary residential custody of Zoe with scheduled visits. The house would remain in my name, with him removed from the mortgage through a formal assumption process, once the repayment plan was legally secured. He would pay child support in accordance with Ontario guidelines. The mortgage broker situation was handled separately, through the legal process. I won't go into the details of what happened there, except to say that the system, slow as it sometimes is, does have mechanisms for situations like this, and those mechanisms engaged. The week the mediation agreement was signed, I took Zoe to her favorite restaurant on the lakeshore, the one with the big windows that look out over the water, where you can see the Toronto skyline across the lake on clear days. We got the window table. We ordered pasta and sparkling water and the chocolate lava cake she had been asking about for 3 months. I looked at her across the table and said, "I need to say something to you." She put down her fork. Attentive. "What you did took a lot of courage," I said, "and a lot of intelligence, and I am so proud of you. But I also want you to know something important." I paused, trying to get the words right. "It is not your job to fix things for the adults in your life. What happened with your dad, that was not your problem to solve. You solved it anyway, and it mattered, and I will never forget that. But I don't want you to carry that. You're 9 years old. The weight of this was mine to carry. I'm sorry you picked it up." Zoe considered this for a moment. Then she said, "I know it wasn't my job, but you were sick, and you were scared, and I wasn't. So it made sense for me to do it." She picked up her fork again. "Also, I like figuring things out. It wasn't as hard as you might think." I laughed, and it was the first real laugh I'd had in weeks, and it surprised me with how much it relieved something in my chest. "The lava cake is really good," she said. We sat there by the window, while the lake did what Lake Ontario does in late spring, which is look vast and gray-green and indifferent and beautiful. I thought about the year behind me, the text message, the budget spreadsheet, the night I spread the mortgage papers on the kitchen table and started reading. I thought about Priya at the bank, and my sister sliding cash across the table, and my lawyer's pause on the phone when I told her what Zoe had found. I thought about my daughter, 9 years old, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework while I stirred soup for too long, watching me, noticing, quietly deciding what needed to be done. There are things you can control in your life and things you cannot. I could not control the fact that the person I had chosen to build a life with turned out to be someone who would hollow that life out from the inside and walk away from it through a text message. I could not control the panic, or the fog, or the 2 weeks of bronchial infection that took me out at exactly the wrong time. What I could control, in the end, was how I responded once I had the information I needed. And I had a 9-year-old to thank for making sure I had it. We are still in the townhouse in Mississauga. Zoe is still at her school, still on her soccer team, still drawing horses at the kitchen table. My sister comes over for dinner on Sundays, and my lawyer sends me updates as the various processes work their way through. My dental hygiene practice at the clinic has, if anything, improved. Because there is something clarifying about crisis, it strips away the things you spent energy on that didn't matter and makes the things that do matter very obvious. What I want to say, to anyone who finds themselves reading this from somewhere dark from a kitchen table at midnight, staring at numbers that don't add up, trying to figure out how you got here, the fog does lift. Not immediately, not without help, but it lifts. Ask for the help you need. Call the lawyer. Go to the bank. Let your sister sit with you. And if your 9-year-old daughter comes to sit on the edge of your bed with a timeline she built in a notes app and says she has an idea, listen to her. You might be surprised. What I learned through all of this, painfully and slowly, and then all at once, is that betrayal reveals things. It reveals who the people around you truly are. The ones who show up, the ones who slide cash across the table without being asked, the ones who drive over from Oakville at 9 at night because you need them. And it reveals who you are, too. What you're made of when everything you built is suddenly in question. I am made of more than I thought. So is my daughter. So, probably, are you. Money can be replaced. Debt can be paid down, 1 month at a time. Trust, once broken, takes longer, and I won't pretend otherwise. I am still, carefully, rebuilding the part of me that trusted easily, and I think that's probably wise. But I am rebuilding. That is the point. And if someone ever tries to tell you that a 9-year-old is too young to understand the world, you are welcome to send them to Zoe. She will very politely correct them, and then go back to drawing horses.